Okay, Jeana, we've covered a lot already. We talked about some of the best practices when it comes to sourcing product managers and then interviewing them, and all of this before we even get into training and retaining them. So please tell me that we can guarantee for our audiences we're going to find that mythical or magical unicorn product manager.
Unfortunately, I don't know that they're findable because I don't think unicorns are turnkey, but I do think you can develop unicorns for your company or your specific context.
Okay, but what if like they leave in 3 days or 3 months? That's a lot of effort.
Yeah. Oh man, that's tough. We'll cover that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Let's get to it then. Welcome to Build, brought to you by Pivotal Tracker. I'm your host, Purnima Vijay Shankar. In each episode, innovators and I debunk a number of myths and misconceptions related to building products, companies, and your career in tech. Now, over the last couple episodes, we've been sharing some best practices when it comes to sourcing, as well as interviewing and hiring top product managers. But I'm sure you're still worried if your product manager is going to be the right fit, or maybe you hired them only to discover that they weren't quite a top performer as you thought they were in the interview process. Well, fear not, because Jeana Alayaay is back. You'll recall Jeana leads the product management as well as design team, and we're going to share some best practices when it comes to training as well as retaining your top performers so that they don't just up and quit. Thanks for joining us again.
Thanks for having me again.
Yeah. Okay, so like I said, we've taken a lot of time to kind of address the criteria for how to find candidates and source those candidates, but then we got to make sure that these people are going to like perform and stick around. So what do we do next?
Yeah, so I think the big thing is having a development plan that's shared with you and your product manager, right? So, and I know that sounds like a super simple, common sense thing to do, but it's amazing because like when we hire these top performers, we sort of like expect them to just like go on their merry way, cut wood and haul water, and then one day they'll leave, right? And we always think, oh, it's because it's more money or whatever the case may be. But like, you know, often the feedback is like, I just didn't feel like I was growing, right? So having that conversation in the beginning and saying like, hey, how do you need to grow? How do you want to grow? And how can we have like an actual development plan that puts you in the way of the opportunities to get you that growth? Like up front is really important.
Okay. And what if they don't know?
Then you're going to have to figure it out together. I think that, you know, obviously folks who tend to be a little bit farther in their journey, like tend to have a better idea, but you always have folks who are just starting out. And I think just like coming up with some things initially and then iterating your way towards it is totally fine. And I think just having a lot of checkpoints there, right? So I don't mean like a development plan that you check in once, like in the annual performance review. I mean something that you're visiting like in every one-on-one, you know, that you look at every quarter and you say like, are we making progress against goal? And with those folks who don't know, like, hey, what are we seeing? Where have we gotten feedback? What are your feelings on this now that you've sort of like, you know, been in the works for a while?
Yeah. So let's backtrack a little bit and just talk about onboarding.
Yeah.
Do you have some best practices when it comes to even onboarding a new product manager coming into your organization?
Yeah. Have them spend a lot of time cross-functionally at first.
Okay.
So like spend some time with the engineers, spend some time with the designers, spend a lot of time with leaders, like those folks who they're going to need to get alignment and decisions from. So I think there's just a lot of like upfront networking that needs to happen that we sort of gloss over because we always want them to sort of jump right in and just start doing things. But that will get you only so far until like relationships really come into play. And so I always like to sort of like invert that model and say like build the relationships first, like the doing things that will happen.
Okay, got it. And for yourself as either the hiring manager or as the manager for this new candidate, how do you think about coaching them or training them?
Yeah, I think the first thing is to like come forward with like really clear expectations. So, you know, one of the things that I say is like, I haven't seen a product manager who's blown my mind in less than a year. Okay. And you know, let me explain more of that. So even if you bring in like a fairly seasoned or senior person, right? they just don't even know the landscape, right? And like so much of their job is like moving people in the landscape. So it's like to expect them to be here when like they don't even know who those people are, like is the wrong expectation to set, right, for both of you. So I think saying like, hey, I expect you to be cutting wood and hauling water in 3 months. At 6 months, I think you're going to have like a good sense of what's going on. And at a year, you're really going to start to be able to make strategic like moves with people.
Okay.
I think that's actually a good approach.
Got it. So kind of set some milestones. But what if there are barriers? The company goals change, or the product goals change, or some giant customer comes in and takes up all of the priorities.
Yeah.
Like how do you kind of back channel that or bring it back into like their specific goals or their career development?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I would say this sort of harkens back to like what I consider to be a red flag for a product manager is not asking for help. So the other side of that is like top performers are really great about raising their hand and saying like, I need help or I think something is changing, right? And they're actually like out there in the woods, like sort of like getting a sense of like how the earth is moving.
Yeah.
And so sometimes they're the best person to say like, I think the tides are changing and like we should pay attention to that. So I think having, again, like a lot of frequent touch points and saying like, hey, is the roadmap changing? Should it change? Like, has the strategy changed? Are there things in the business that are evolving that are going to affect us? And having that be a part of the regular conversation is super important. If we're waiting to the point that it's already changed and we're in, you know, a fire drill mode, like, you know, it's too late. The feedback loop is too long.
Yep. Okay, so we're putting in a lot of effort to onboard, train, and consistently coach them. But for whatever reason, after they've been a product manager for you for a few months, you notice that they're just not really performing. And they might have been stellar in that interview process, but something just isn't adding up.
Yeah.
What do you do?
Yeah. So I think the first thing I do is like sort of turn the mirror back on myself and say like, have I actually set expectations clear enough?
Right.
Right? Because often, like, they just don't know what their job is. So, like, the flailing that you're seeing is, like, them trying to figure that out, right? So we have this expectation that, like, they're going to know exactly what to do, and they don't. And maybe it's not you. Maybe it's somebody else in the system that has a lot of impact on their day-to-day work. I think the next thing is, like, actually having a conversation about it. Like, are they aware of it?
Right.
And, like, can they actually give you some guidance about how to coach them, right? So I think that, you know, you have folks who have a lot of self-awareness. And so saying like, hey, I think we're struggling. What do you think is going on here? And like seeing what they say and then say like, okay, if there's awareness there, say like, why do you think it is that you're struggling? How do we get you the help that you need? And just having a very explicit conversation about it. I think it's, you know, totally like death by a thousand cuts. Like have the conversation early and often and like don't wait until it's gone on and on and on for too long.
Yeah, I think even in that expectation setting, getting very granular. I know some organizations expect their product managers to do all the wireframes, maybe do consistent usability tests, and other organizations are like, oh no, we don't expect that from our product managers. That's like something a designer does. So then when the product manager doesn't deliver a very concrete thing, they're kind of like, what are you doing, right? But they never conveyed like, these were some things that we expected from you. They just kind of conveyed the high level, like, improve our conversion rate, monetize our product, get us out there and get more customers, right? So I think you kind of have to have that balance of here's the super granular stuff, here's the high level stuff. And maybe for the high level stuff, you figure out how to go out and do it. And maybe that's talking to customers, maybe that's something else.
Yeah, I think keeping a really tight feedback loop on that is really important, right? So knowing that like they're not sure what's going on or like you haven't gotten granular enough and like opening up that feedback channel is really important. So I even say like, hey, if you're not getting the information you need from me, like bang down my door, like please, like early and often. And I think the other bit is like that I forgot to mention is like make sure that they're shadowing a product manager who's already like hit their stride in the org, right? So that they have a sense of like what the day-to-day should look like, right? And not to say that it should look exactly like that, but they know what normal is. You know? Because it's like, how else will they know that you're supposed to do the wireframes, you're not supposed to do the wireframes? It's like, you know.
I think it can be a challenge, though, in a smaller organization where this might be the first product manager, and maybe they're taking on somebody's responsibility who was, like, the lead designer or the chief product officer. And so now they're taking on a bunch of tasks, like daily to-dos, but then they also have the higher level kind of road mapping, thinking about where they're going.
Yeah, so product manager, if you're stepping into this role, make sure you do stakeholder interviews up front.
Okay.
Right? So when you get
good.
into that org,
Yeah.
go figure out who's doing the work, who the leaders are, and saying, like, where do you need me to fill in the gaps? Where do you need me to take the load off you? What is the plan for this, right? So if you're the first on any team, figuring out what the hiring plan is super important, right? Because that's how you can figure out, like, where you're going to, like, you know, water between rocks, where you're going to need to fill in.
Yeah.
So if the plan is to hire more and more designers first, right, probably don't focus too much on, like, taking up all that work. Focus somewhere else. Like, you know, I'm going to have to do more of this sort of classic product manager backlog stuff because we're not going to hire them until later, right? So, stakeholder interviews, have a sense of what the hiring plan is. Make sure you get milestones for them. So say, like, okay, I know that we don't have the funds or the time or whatever to hire today. When do we expect to hire?
Yeah.
Right? So you can even manage your expectations around, like, how long your work's going to look like this.
Yeah. So even after all of this effort, right, we have an open door policy, we're coaching, they're giving us feedback, somebody just stops performing, and all of our efforts aren't going to kind of turn this candidate, this employee around. What do we do?
Yeah, so I think when we first get the sense that it's not working, it's a service to them and to you to actually explicitly say, this isn't working. What are we going to do about it? And I know that seems like, again, very simple, but you'd be surprised, like, how many managers struggle to actually, like, have that conversation. So it's like often the person doesn't know that they're not performing until they're put on a PIP or they're, like, asked to leave, right?
Yeah.
So again, like, saying early or, like, when you actually believe it's become true that, like, hey, this isn't working, that's a really important step. Because one, like, you're giving them the opportunity to turn around, and you're also giving yourself the opportunity to, like, think differently about the problem. And so let's say you go through all of that, I would say, like, coach them out, right? Like, have an explicit conversation about, like, this doesn't seem like the right fit. Like, how can I help you get on to the next thing? Now, of course, there's, like, extenuating circumstances where, like, crazy things happen with HR or whatever, but I feel like that's a different case.
Okay.
Usually it's just, like, they no longer meet the needs of the org, or, like, the org's changed, or they were the right person 2 years ago, but not the right person today.
Yeah.
All of those sort of things. It's usually fit things.
Yeah. Which brings up the kind of overriding question, which is the performance review, right?
Yeah.
Having to wait 6 months or a year.
Yeah.
And the performance review for a product manager is definitely different from, like, your engineers, where things are a little bit more, I wouldn't say this in every case, but, like, a little bit more cut and dry. Like, people are writing code, it's quality, it's tested, it gets out there, they're fixing bugs. In a product manager role, it's a little bit more nuanced where, you know, they may come back to you and say, well, here are all the things that I've done, but now I'm stuck because the stakeholder won't move us forward. Or I'm stuck because marketing needs to have a bigger budget to attract more customers so that we can then convert and monetize them. So how do you kind of structure that performance review?
Yeah, I think this goes back to having a development plan early on and actually, like, keeping a pulse on it, like a very frequent pulse on it. So like, it comes up, at least in passing, in my one-on-ones, like, bi-weekly, certainly monthly, and then on the quarter, and so on and so forth. I think the product, to what you're saying, the product management cycle is, like, much longer than the dev or design cycle. So I think it is harder to get strong signals. But I think there are success metrics that should be in the development plan that you're sort of, like, measuring as you go, and you should also be iterating on them. Again, the thing that would alarm me is if they hadn't told me about said stakeholder that's blocking them until the performance review. Right? Like, that's the wrong time to tell me. And I would say that's a performance issue versus being blocked. You know? Because if that was a thing that I could have tried to help you solve 6 months ago, like, we should have done that 6 months ago. Like, I'm not sure why we're waiting on it until now. So the things that I would think of as a performance issues are usually communication-based.
And what are some specific success metrics?
Yeah, so the success metrics that I like to put in product managers' plans are usually, like, learning goals, right? So at any given time, a product is in a specific life cycle. Thinking about, you know, what part of the funnel you're focusing on, or, like, how you're trying to develop out that product, and say to yourself, okay, what do we need to learn as a team in order to get to the next phase for that product? And so having learning goals for product managers that point to that is really important. So things like, you know, we should go out and learn from users what, like, the next problem is. I'm being super generic here. But Like, do we have evidence about what platform we should develop out next? Things like that. Not so quantitative, but really like, hey, are they out there seeking the problem, moving the org in the direction, right? Like, because that's a lot of their job is like, do we see evidence of movement?
Got it. Okay. So finally, despite all of your best efforts, someone just ups and quits. And because this is such a critical role, how do you respond?
Yeah, I guess it really depends on the circumstance. But I think the first question I would ask myself is, like, did we give them enough permission not to buy, like, in the interview process, right? So there's always extenuating circumstances, something with the family, they were offered double somewhere. I don't know what those things are. But there's other things, like, they came in and, like, it's not at all what they expected it. And that's the thing that I want to fix. So if we didn't give them a good sense of, like, what the environment's going to be like, I think that's on us. And again, I think the other bit is, like, make sure you always have your list of 20 people that you're going to hit up next.
Yeah, of course. Go back and see our first episode on that.
Because you never know when you're going to need to fill a role. Like, you just don't know. You should always be prepared.
Right. I think it is a bit of a challenge, though, to suss some of that out in an exit interview because people want to leave and they don't want to burn bridges, or they're kind of like, I don't want to spell this out for you. I mean, if you don't know why I'm leaving, I don't know if, like, you'll ever know. So sometimes that happens too, and it might not be, like, your specific fault as the hiring manager. It might be a team issue. It might be kind of a company-wide or a leadership issue.
That's right. Yeah. Having a post-mortem within the working group, I think, is a way that we've addressed that in the past, right? Because I totally agree with you. They get the exit interview. They don't want to say all the things. They don't want to, like, air all the laundry. Yeah. So I think having a post-mortem as a team and saying, like, hey, so-and-so left, like, what do we know about that context, right? Like, what are the different perspectives here? What did we see? What did we not see? Like, we can't all possibly have the information. So, like, getting all that data from the different places and pulling it together, at least to have a clearer picture of what might have happened, super useful.
Thanks a lot, Jeana, for sharing your best practices when it comes to sourcing, interviewing, hiring, and retaining product managers.
Thanks for having me. It's always fun to chat.
Yeah. And that's it for this week's episode of Build. Be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel to receive the next episode. And be sure to share this episode with your friends, your teammates, and your boss. Ciao for now.
This episode of Build is brought to you by our main sponsor, Pivotal Tracker. We'd also like to thank our Platinum Patreon patrons, Corky Bites, The Developer Show, and Jamie Hand. Finally, thanks to the following new patrons. If you've enjoyed watching Build, please consider becoming a patron and contributing on Patreon at www.patreon.com/build. You can pledge $5 a month or more, and your pledges will go towards helping us produce and promote the show. In exchange, you'll receive perks like being mentioned in the credits, digital copies of our latest book, and Platinum patrons will receive exclusive perks like monthly online group coaching, where I provide more hands-on coaching on a number of topics related to entrepreneurship and leadership. To find out more and contribute, please visit www.patreon.com/build.